Hey everyone, you're listening to the Simple Electronics Podcast. I'm your host, Dan, from the Simple Electronics YouTube channel. This episode is brought to you by PCBWay, but more about that a little later on, because right now I've got Jake from Millennium Machines. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm tired. Very tired.
Aren't you on vacation this week?
I am, but I never really have a vacation. I'm always doing other things.
Yeah,
So
I
go
agree
ahead.
with you, because I was on vacation last week. I ended up, quote unquote, trying to do nothing, but I ended up busier than usual. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no rest for the wicked, I'm afraid.
So I just met you very recently, so I don't know much about you, but for my listeners, they may not know you at all. Can you just give us a quick little intro about who you are and what you do, please?
Yeah, cool. My name is Jake England. I am from a very strange mix of places. Originally from East Africa, moved all around the world. Finally settled myself in the UK, and I am the founder of the Millennium Machines project. We build desktop CNC machines for the average everyday weekend warrior or average Joe. Kind of trying our hardest to bring entry-level machines that are decently good enough to the market.
And your project is sweet, I must say. I'm not even sure where to start, so maybe we'll go this direction. I here have I think they're called a 3020 desktop mill. They're really small motor spindle. I think it's a bed slinger as well, so the bed moves back and forth. What would you say is the difference between an entry level milling machine like the 3020 you can get on Amazon for probably about $500-600 and the Milo 1.5, which is the most recent release?
Far more of a loaded question than you may have anticipated. So effectively, it comes down to having the right tool for the job. So those 3020 machines are fine if all you want to do is make a small cutting board or a PCB every now and again, but they can be a pain to use. And my philosophy with tools is that if they're a pain to use, if they're slow, if they're just downright annoying, you're going to use them less and less and less until you figure out that the machine that you actually want is the thing you're going to get. So you've just wasted the money on the 3020. Did I say 3020?
Yeah, I think it's a 3020.
3020. Yeah. So the whole idea around the main difference is that Milo is a proper knee style mill versus a portal style mill or a gantry style mill. It's designed from the ground up to be able to, at a minimum, cut aluminium. And then if you're thinking of that like a cut hierarchy, you have like steel and stainless steel at the very top. Then you go aluminium, brass, coppers, all that kind of stepping down. So if you can cut aluminium, you can cut all the things below it, typically. Whereas if you're on a 3020 machine, you're starting at wood, you basically got PCBs underneath, and that's pretty much it. Does that make sense so far?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it wasn't really a loaded question. I kind of knew the answer. I'm a little bit of a machining tourist. I watch This Old Tony. I don't know if you've seen that YouTube channel.
Yeah, everyone loves a bit of This Old Tony.
Yeah, so I'm well aware of the differences between like a knee mill and those 3020s, but the deal is that it's not obvious to someone who doesn't watch someone like This Old Tony what the differences are, and it's quite important to highlight stuff like rigidity in machining, because you have cutting forces, right, is a big deal. Am I right on that?
Oh yeah, rigidity and damping is one of the things that people don't talk about enough. So those are again some of the big differences. Milo is a lot more rigid and has a lot more damping capability than a 3020 mil.
So tell me, what is the philosophy then between behind the Milo? Because from what I can see, it's it's an expensive thing to get into machining. Is your philosophy to bring that price down, or is your philosophy more to, have something that you can build yourself?
It's kind of somewhere through the middle. So if you think about it, your closest kind of analog to Milo and the hobby space is probably something like a Tag or a Sieg mill, like one of the mini mills. And at that point, you're spending $2,000 to $3,000 on just the machine, and then you're spending another 1,000 to 1,500 to convert it to CNC, right? So we can offer a machine that's substantially cheaper than that at a performance that kind of meets that price point. So no, it's not going to be as good as the proper cast iron machines that have been converted to CNC, but as a bang for buck alternative, it's really good. Like, you can cut some really decent parts out of aluminium, and we've even had people try and cut some steel with some pretty decent success, actually. So that's the kind of monetary side of it. The other side of it is kind of more of a community thing. We've seen from projects like Voron and Mercury and VZBot, all those kind of 3D printing projects. We've seen loads of good innovation come from the community. So having a load of people around you really helps to make sure that these machines get pushed further and further into the kind of realm where they're very, very usable, rather than just little toys you can have in the attic.
Absolutely. And I will say that the number one aspect of the Milo project, or the Millennium Machines, is it fair to say that Millennium Machines as a whole is also a project, or am I speaking out of turn?
Millennium Machines as a whole as a project. So we don't just do machines. We also do like fixture plates, vice. Well, we're planning on releasing a vice at some stage. Things that you don't necessarily need to use on our machines, but you could take into other settings.
So what impresses me the most about the whole deal is that, well, at least the Milo 1.5, I don't know about the rest of your stuff, but the Milo 1.5 is open source, meaning that I could theoretically go on your GitHub and find a BOM, BOM for the YouTube raiders that are listening, not BOMB, and order all the parts myself and build it myself without any involvement from you guys. So what inspired you to open source this machine? Because that's something that's very important to a lot of makers.
Yeah, open source wasn't really a question for me. Even back in the day when I was originally going to make it a whole company thing, I was going to release everything still as open source. But it was never a question, because I'd seen the communities, the Vorons, the VZBots, like we said before, and I'd seen how good it is for a community to be able to have input on things, as well as we've noticed since we started the project, there are a lot of countries that just don't have easy access to shipping full machines. So we've had loads of people from Brazil start up companies based around making parts on Milo, but they can't get the LDO kits, the Fabrico kits, that kind of stuff. So having everything open source allows them, as people in countries where it's hard to get things, to be able to make these machines. So on that level, it's really important. And even now, looking into it, now that we've got big companies on our side who are making kits for us, we're never ever going to move away from open source / standard components because of those kind of people. And at the end of it, because of open source, because of it all, we've got a good community. The open source community is awesome because of it.
Would you say that having open source projects allowed Millennium Machines to exist in the first place, though? Because I think your website cites the an Open Builds mini mill as its sort of like reference, or as its inspiration. Is that right?
Yep. the Open Builds mini mill. So I'll tell you a little bit of history around the project. I was in university. COVID hit when this whole project kind of started. I had only had a 3D printer for a few weeks at the time, and I wasn't going to university for anything that had to do with engineering or mechatronics or anything like that. I actually went to university to get an outdoor degree as an outdoor leader. So that all hit. I looked at a few videos online of the Open Builds mini mill, looked at it and went, you know what, I can do better, right? And because of the fact that Open Builds published that as an open source project, allowed me to get a start into modifying that into what you now see today as the Milo. So yeah, I would say if it wasn't for Open Builds and open source, I wouldn't be here.
Which makes sense. I mean, a lot of us wouldn't be here, and as far as the makerspace and the people I interview on this very podcast, because companies like Arduino, for example, the fact that they're open source meant that I could buy a $3 microcontroller from AliExpress to know if I even wanted to do electronics, to see if I could even wrap my head around it. So I'm really appreciative for open source projects, and it's part of the reason why I asked you to be on this podcast. I mean, one is I'm just really impressed by the Milo itself, but the fact that it's open source to me means so much because, like you said, not everyone can afford to get a whole machine shipped, and not everyone can afford to just buy a machine in one shot.
Yeah.
A very, I would say, reputable kit builder for Voron is LDO, and you spoke about LDO earlier. And if I'm looking here, I can buy the LDO Milo 1.5 kit for $2,000 Canadian. Now that's not cheap by any means, but machining is not a cheap hobby. If I wanted to buy a used metal lathe, I would be paying more than that. So machining is very expensive, and the fact that I can get in for the price of, a quite high-end 3D printer is quite impressive.
Oh yeah. I think so too. Thank you. Yeah, it's a whole different world from the 3D printing side of things, but then again, there's so much overlap that we've had in the last few years. I'm talking less than 5 years. There's been so much overlap that's allowed us to take what we've learned from the 3D printing world and push it into the CNC world recently.
Sure. Can you give us a couple examples from that? I mean, things that I can see right off the bat, and it may be more obvious to you, but you guys have a ABS or a ASA holder for the CNC spindle. So the actual motor that you would mount a cutting tool onto looks like it's being mounted to the machine with ABS and ASA, very much a la Voron.
Yes, so we do use an ABS spindle holder as the kind of we call it bootstrapping. So Milo can be completely built out of, well, other than the extrusions and the rails and things like that. Everything else can be printed parts if you wanted to get a start in that, and then Milo can then mill out its own upgrades if you really wanted to. So the X, Y, and the Z plates that hold the spindle mount and the table together. We have had people go from fully plastic parts to fully metal parts from just making their own machine. So there's a kind of bootstrapping mentality behind that. The spindle mount at the moment, there's something called the Hearts of Iron mod, HOI. So it allows you to keep that kind of aesthetic front cover, but put some aluminium inserts into it that you can mill out on the standard machine, so that you can boost the rigidity quite a lot. So there's all that kind of stuff that we've learned. The kind of self-replicating side of 3D printing has now pushed itself into the milling space. There's also a lot of other things that we've got from the 3D printing world. Cheap main boards is one of them. open source firmware. So we use RepRap firmware. I know RepRap firmware isn't perfect, but we are working with the Duet guys to make it a lot better for CNC capabilities. And there's a lot going on in the background that you guys don't know about just yet. But also things like the availability of rails, the availability of extrusions. All of those, like the prices of rails, have gone down significantly in the past 5 years. And I think a big factor of that is because of the 3D printing space. The like Voron used rails, VZBot uses rails. So there's a lot we can say would not have happened if it wasn't for the 3D printing space.
Yeah, and a lot of things are shared as well. I mean, you were saying boards and firmware and rails, but I mean, at the end of the day, a milling machine is just like an extremely rigid version of a 3D printer, basically a stronger, more rigid version, because I mean, you're using stepper motors, which everyone now is familiar with. You're using drag chains. You're using all sorts of stuff that existed in the 3D printer world. In fact, there's even this push in the 3D printer world to have an enclosure. And for different reasons, there's also an enclosure. I believe someone built an enclosure for the Milo, right?
Yeah, so we do have an enclosure, an official enclosure called CASA. CASA is it's out there in full release right now, but we're just waiting on kits from LDO so that people can actually get it in their hands. Because Milo does make quite a bit of mess when you're using it, from chips flying everywhere.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What would you say like was your biggest challenge? Like for me, when I build large projects, I'm a very iterative designer. So I need to design, print the part, have it in front of me before I can design a part that goes into it. Do you have any challenges you can talk to us about in the designing of the Milo?
In the design of Milo, this is more of a personal thing. So Milo V1.4 and V1.5 was, like I said, it was a university project. So a lot of the time I didn't have the money to source parts. I was your classic broke university student. So it was a long time between iterations of things. That's why it took 3 years to get the original machine out, the original release. So there was a big money side of thing because it took me. I think I could buy one spool of filament a month, and if I messed something up, if I didn't take the time to design it properly, that was a month where I didn't make any progress in terms of a prototype.
That's brutal.
And then yeah, and then there was later on after V1.4 released. I was staying with my girlfriend, and it was still COVID at the time, and my girlfriend and I split up. So there was a good 4 or 5 months where I was effectively homeless during the whole design process, and I was it was a hard experience. So that's more of a personal side of it now. It's funny you should mention the kind of iterative process. So it's quite common in the machine workspace or the machining space to have what's called a box of shame. And your box of shame has all the parts and all the bits that you either designed poorly and or messed up on the way on during the whole thing. And I've started keeping those. So we're working on the next machine. I've currently got 11 kilos of failed / bad parts that I've iterated on that I stash in a box somewhere.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Milo's a hefty machine. It's not. It's not. It's not like a Voron where if you fail to print one part, you've missed out on 50 grams of filament. Like if you fail a single one of the big parts on Milo, that's like 400 grams worth of filament.
Something like the spindle mount, for example, that looks giant to me.
Yeah. If you mess that up, there's a good chance you're gonna have to buy another roll.
Jeez. Is there a reason why all the publicity pictures I see, especially from LDO, they're printed in very Voron red and black, or is that just coincidence?
I like red and black. That's pretty much it.
I mean, they've got that color scheme down. I think at least.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a nice color scheme. It might have been back in the day where we were very much inspired by Voron and the way that they did things. So it might have been a bit at the back of my brain going, do it in red and black, do it in red and black. Just like the Voron guys, just like the Voron guys. Yeah.
I mean, those Voron guys, I'm very envious of their design talent and yours as
Yeah.
well at this point. You keep saying we, but I only know of you. So how much of a team have you built around the Milo?
So we're currently at around 6 or 7 core developers. So if anyone ever does decide to get into an open source project, you got to realize one hard and fast rule is that you probably aren't smart enough to do everything by yourself. The best thing that you can do if you're starting up an open source project is to get other people on board. So, for example, I'm pretty good at the mechanical design of things, but I'm not very good at the electronic side of things. So we have 9 Mile, Ben, who's one of our team members. He runs the whole of Millennium OS. He does all the kind of background technical stuff. We've got Dave, who is our number one machine breaker. Like, he breaks any machine that I send him, and he's the best tester I've ever had. And a lot of the time, he spots things that I don't spot as a designer, because if you ever do design things, you can fall into a real trap of, oh, this is how I would do it, but is this necessarily how someone else would do it? So Dave's really good at that. Ed is our kind of he's more of a guy on the team that we go to because he's from a traditional machining background. Like, he's been in the industry for a very long time, so we can go to him to ask for what is the standard that we need to uphold for this certain thing. How do these machines work? How does that have? And he's a good base of knowledge that we can draw from. We've then got a couple of people who do like our graphic design stuff. So a lot of the kind of renders that you see are done by them. We've got Xscale, who helps out. He's kind of he does a lot of the PIF program stuff, the printed forward program stuff, and he's opening up the Millet forward program soon.
Oh, very
and
neat.
And he also runs kind of some of the technical stuff on the outside. So he helps me put together a lot of the GitHub repos. Yeah. So there's lots of people on the team, and they all have their various roles. And a lot of the time, we don't have hard fast roles. It's what people decide that they want to help out with.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So now I think we've kind of whet the audience's appetite. They kind of know what the Millennium Machines deal is all about. How about talking a little bit about the machine's capabilities? Like, how big a chunk can you mill on this thing, for example?
So we're talking Milo 1.5, yeah?
Yeah, the 1.5.
Cool. So 1.5 is designed from the ground up to be able to cut aluminium. Like, you can do it stock, all printed parts, cut some aluminium. You can do a few upgrades that I do recommend. So there's kind of like a final form of Milo, and that has FMJs, which have the big metal side plates that are laser cut, and the HOI, and then the metal X, Y, and Z plate. Now, if you're buying a kit nowadays, you most of the time will have at least 2 of those, which are the FMJs and the metal plates. When you've got that, you're looking at around about what we call a material removal rate of around about 13 cubic centimeters a minute. And if you think of that as like flow rate on a 3D printer, the higher that number is, the more plastic you can lay down. The higher your material removal rate is, the more material you can remove in any unit of time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So when you get to the final form of Milo, you can take around about a 6 mil depth of cut on a 6 mm end mill at 50% engagement, 40 to 50% engagement, right? And if just for the people who aren't machinists, if you're thinking of an end mill, which is basically just a cylinder, your engagement is the percentage of that cylinder in contact with the material as it cuts. So the higher that contact area is, the more you're cutting. The lesser that contact area is, the less you're cutting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that kind of rivals some full-size machines in terms of a material removal rate. So that's your kind of speed at which you can cut things. Your actual work volume is on Milo 1.5 is 160 in your y-axis, so your back and forth table movement. 120 if you've got FMJs in your z-axis, so your up and down axis, and then your left to right axis, your x-axis, is I think it's 340 millimeters, but the x-axis can be expanded, so you can actually push that to up to about 500 millimeters if you really wanted to. But at that point, your material is going to be so heavy that it's going to start bending the bed if you actually need that much space.
Yeah, fair. I was wondering actually how you can have such long overhangs right on the x-axis, but then I realized the cutting head doesn't move, so all the forces will be on top of the rails in the most sturdy position. So that makes a lot more sense now that I think about it like that.
So your z-axis, your end mill, is always in the middle of 8 sets of rails, of rail carriages, and it's just the rails that move themselves relative to the position of the end mill. So you've always got the most sturdy point in contact with the material at all times.
And you're still able to get this removal rate without like a traditional sort of dovetail linkage like on a traditional mill.
Yep. So we'll go into some machining history here. The reason we had dovetail ways for a very, very long time was because it was practical to do, more so than rails were at the time. Dovetails were kind of the precursor to rails. They don't take high speed very well. High feed very well. So if you look at some of the more modern CNC machines, a lot of them will have an epoxy granite cast machine base, and then they'll have rails bolted into them. So even the industrial side is moving towards rails rather than ways.
Interesting. Which means that rails are going to get even cheaper over time.
Yes and no. The industrial sector doesn't tend to affect us too much. They've been using rails in industry for the last 10, 20 years. So yes, it will eventually make it cheaper for us, but a lot less so than small communities like us, like Millennium, like Voron, blah, 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 blah. I've said so many times during this podcast.
Do you think that since the Milo is open source, do you think you're going to see a whole bunch of like a flood of Chinese clones on AliExpress in the next year or two? Or is that not likely because of reasons?
No, I don't think so. In the same way that you haven't really seen very many Chinese Voron clones, because we're already operating on the idea that the end user needs to get the most bang for buck, right? We're already operating on that principle. And therefore, there's not really much anyone else can do to be able to get down to our level, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm just thinking, because I will say the Voron project is amazing, but I believe, and this is just my personal thought, I believe that machines like the Bamboo Labs and then the race to join them with the Creality, I think it's K1C 3D printer, and now the Soval SV08, which is essentially a Voron. I believe all that was spurred on by the Voron project. So I'm not sure. Maybe clone is the wrong word, but do you think maybe we're going to see some Chinese knee mills inspired by the Milo then?
I mean, yes, I hope so, but I also don't hope so. I hope whatever does come out, because at the end of the day, I just want machines in people's hands. I don't care where they come from, so long as if it is based on whatever someone else does, that they get some kind of not notifications, some
Like
what's the
recognition?
word?
Some,
Recognition.
yeah.
That's the word. If as long as it's done properly, I just don't want to race to the bottom like Creality had a few years ago on their printers, where it was just whoever could make the cheapest printer that had absolutely no innovation whatsoever. Right? I just hope it doesn't turn into that. But if Chinese clones or Chinese machines start coming out and they're good, I'll be absolutely happy with that.
Yeah, but you seem to think that the Milo is just about at the point where you couldn't really cost it down, right? That's your opinion?
Yeah. So we're in development for the next machine, with the next version of Milo at the moment. I'm not going to try and not say too much about it, but we've got to a point where the only way up is to spend a little bit more. We're still trying to cost it down so it's not as expensive as one of the cast machines that you can buy, and we're definitely going to hit that mark. But it is going to become a bit more expensive because of it. Like from our side, from our end, we just don't see it happening. It getting much cheaper than this.
I mean, I don't think I would be doing my job if I didn't at least ask you, but feel free to dodge the question. But is there anything that you can tell us about the upcoming version? Anything at all?
I can tell you one really secret thing. It will be a mill.
Okay. But
that's about as much as you're gonna get from me. No, there's some things I've made public about it. So we are looking at trying to support a fourth axis in it. It might not be part of the main Milo release, Milo V 1.5 release. We're trying to do a load of different kind of quality of life improvements in terms of the tramming, because tramming can be quite a hard thing to get your head around if you've not been in the CNC space before, the CNC machining space at least, and some other just quality of life stuff.
Just a quick interruption to talk about this episode's sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay has been a long-term sponsor of the channel, and I think they're a good match for my channel because they provide quality PCBs for a reasonable price. You can get boards manufactured up to 100 mils by 100 mils for just $5. Including shipping to Canada, $15 US. Including shipping to USA, $12 US, which is incredibly cheap for professionally manufactured PCBs. I can personally attest to the quality of these PCBs, and so if you want a circuit immortalized forever, check out PCBWay.com with the link in the description. Now back to the conversation. Yeah, I mean, fair enough. Oh yeah, another question I want to ask you directly. I don't know if you personally have experienced this, but as a Canadian, I can only use 110 volts for the most part. For the most demanding part of the Milo would be the spindle. Have you seen any problems with the 110 volt version of the machine? Is it just far less capable, or are the problems not that bad?
No, we've not seen any difference at all really between the two. You're mostly looking at the power output of the spindle. It doesn't overly matter too much about the voltage that you're running them at. But if you're running a 1.5 kilowatt spindle at 220, so long as the specs are the same and you're running it at 110, they're pretty much the same in terms of actual power output.
Gotcha.
So there's no real issues there. The issue comes more down to the way your circuits are laid out in your house. A lot of people have old houses in the US that can't actually take that much more than I think it's 10 amps that you need for somewhere between 10 and 15 amps power draw that a 1.5 kilowatt spindle needs.
Yeah, I think
that's just old power circuits, I'm afraid. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. I just know that typical house power here is 110 volts, 15 amps. And then if you have a kitchen circuit, you'll have 110 volts, 20 amps. And then a lot of us have 220 volt dryer plugs and oven plugs. So you can access 220 for the most part. But like people like me, for example, all my circuits are used in the house. So I would have to use 110 volts, 15 amps. And that limits you. So 110 times 15, just a rough calculation here, to 1650 watts. So thankfully the Milo uses a VFD, I think, variable frequency drive, which would mean it doesn't have a lot of startup current. But if you're running like a 1600 watt motor without a soft start, you can easily blow the fuse just on the startup.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So it's a little bit rough in that case.
Just for some people who don't know this, I believe, and correct me if you do know the answer here, that the US is actually technically a 220. The US and Canada is technically a 220 volt nation, but you have something called split phase or something like that. I can't quite remember what it is. So the power actually incoming to the house is split up into two 110 volt lines at some junction or whatever, and you can quite easily get an electrician over to combine those two and get yourself a 220 line into your house, should you so wish to do a 220 Milo for some reason or another, or run 220 volt appliances.
Yep, absolutely. So it comes into the house as 220. It's just on two separate phases and then a ground. Yep. And then in the panel, it gets divided into individual phases. But if your house has been renovated or built since, well, it depends on your jurisdiction, I guess, but in the last 20 years or so, your kitchen outlets will actually be a 3-wire outlet. So our outlets here are duplexes, so there are always 2 outlets on the same fascia, and one outlet will be 110 volts, 20 amps of one phase, and then the other outlet below it will be another 110 volts, 20 amps of a separate phase. So in principle, you probably shouldn't do this if you're listening to this podcast and don't know about this already. Don't mess with your electricity, folks. But in principle, you can use the hot of one phase and the hot of the other phase, or is it the ground of the other phase? See, yeah, don't do what I'm saying. And you can access 220 volts. Electro Boom has a great video on that. And I recommend you watch his video because he'll also show you the pitfalls of messing with it. So yeah, in principle, we all have 220, but the deal is if your panel is full, like our electricity panel, if it's a 100 amp panel and it's already full, then you can't add anything. So that's the pain in the butt.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, before we talked about the new version, I wanted actually to ask you, because you were talking about clones and stuff. This project seems like it requires a lot of attention, and you spoke that you have quite a bit of people on your team. Is there a way that your open source project brings in some income to support itself a little bit?
Yeah, so we operate in the same way as the Voron guys do. We did ask the Voron guys how they did it, and we kind of we didn't copy them, but we took a lot of inspiration from the way they did stuff. And basically, we can take any amount of money as a donation, so long as people understand that if you do donate, that money may need to end up in someone's pocket should they need that money to survive, if that makes sense. So grocery bills need to be paid, lights need to stay on, stuff like that. So that money can be used in whatever way we see fit, if needs be. But then we also have any money coming in from companies. So we do have donations coming from a few big companies. I won't mention them, who they are. We don't have standing deals with them. At no point will we ever accept a standing deal with a company where they then could possibly have power over the project. We still maintain full power and rights over the project, but we do accept donations from them. Any of that money goes directly to a kind of communal pot that we can draw from whenever we need to buy parts for new projects. It's not a lot of money right now, but it does cover enough in the way that we can continue to develop for things.
If someone is listening right now and decided that they love the project and want to donate, what's the easiest way to do it?
So, for the individual person, you need to donate to one of the developers. If you head onto our Discord, there's a channel called Donate to a Developer with everyone's details in them. If you think that I've done a good job in terms of designing Milo, you can go find my link, send me a bit of cash if you want so. There's absolutely no pressure to do so whatsoever. If you like what 9 Mile has been doing with Millennium OS, then you can go send him some money. If you like whatever each individual person has been doing, just find their details and you can donate to them.
And how about a company? Let's say a large company doesn't care about recognition. They just want to send you, let's say, tools or equipment or a monetary donation. Who would they get in contact for that?
So you can contact the three kind of lead devs, the three top lead devs are me, 9 Mile, and Dave. Contact either one of us, and we will push it back to the team, see who needs the tools or who's most likely going to use them, and then you can do it that way.
Sounds good. And what if someone like me, for example, just an individual who knows nothing about machining, would like to put together a kit and sell a kit? Is there any rights involved, or what's the deal with that?
The only thing we ask for is attribution. So if you are going to sell it as a Milo and you've used any of the design work we've done, you just have to say that this was designed by the Millennium team, and that's it. You can put it together, you can sell it, you can do whatever you want with it. We just ask for that attribution, that's all.
Sounds good. And so I think that kind of covers the machine itself. Is there anything you wanted to add before we move on about the machine, the 1.5, or something that's upcoming?
I'll drop one small teaser. We're not just focusing on knee mills right now.
Oh, that is interesting. Now I'm going to make my own inference. I have no inside information, so I can do this. I'm hoping that a metal lathe is in the works, and maybe it's not, but maybe if you have something in the corner of your mind, I think there is a demand for that.
I think there's a demand for it too, but I'm going to just clarify something as it stands right now. So a mill, a cast iron mill, is about $2,000 to $3,000, right? US dollars.
A mini mill.
A mini mill.
Yeah.
You can buy a mini lathe for about 600.
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
They're extremely cheap, especially in the US. For us to create something that would even start to rival a $600 plus whatever it takes to CNCify it, right, would probably underperform, right? So it makes more sense for you to buy a lathe and convert that to CNC than it does to build one from scratch. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yep.
Currently, I'm not saying it wouldn't be a fun design and that we could do some awesome stuff with it and we could probably make it the same kind of performance as Milo is in terms of cutting aluminium, maybe even steel. But as a kind of bang for buck alternative, it's hard to justify doing that dev work right now. But I know Dave really wants to do one, so it may be a thing in future. It may not be. We just need to justify it to ourselves.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. And the reason I brought it up personally is because I've been wanting to pull the trigger on one of those mini mills or mini lathes, sorry. But the issue is they're using dovetail ways. And so if it's machined wrong, you can't just replace a rail. You'd have to grind it down or something like that. So I'm a little scared to sink, what's equivalent to about half a year's worth of AdSense, Patreon money, and sponsorship money on a tool that may end up with really bad results without me being the problem. Whereas I'm probably going to be the problem on top of that. You know what I mean?
No, that makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So something like that is the reason also why I bought a Voron V0 kit and built a Voron V0, because there are machines that were fully assembled for roughly the same price that'll do ABS as well. But the issue is that if it doesn't do it well, at least with the Voron, there's a whole bunch of people who have built it and have experienced problems. I can more easily troubleshoot it than my experience troubleshooting with companies who sell finished products. It's not great. So yeah, I decided to go with the V0 Plus. I mean, it's like adult Lego, right? You get to assemble stuff and then you have a working machine after.
Oh yeah, it's quite fun. I'm really really spoilt at the moment because Jason from LDO allows us to have a few little Voron kits every now and again just to help out with dev work. So I get to do adult Lego more often.
Yeah, that's really nice. I haven't delved into the LDO kits yet, but because they're quite a large markup over what you can get from like an AliExpress vendor, and I understand that there's a quality that comes around with it, but sometimes when you're trying to stretch the budget, I'd rather maybe have issues with an AliExpress vendor and then share those issues to warn people off, because when you buy when you buy an LDO kit, it's pretty much guaranteed that all the parts are proper, everything works, and so there's a lot less drama as a content creator. And you kind of there's a price to pay for that. Yes, it's nice for just people who love to build their machines and then make it work for them. But for me, the journey is kind of the point, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, it makes total sense. When I got into like my first Voron, which was also a V0, I bought myself a Formbot kit for like $300 because at the time it was just all I could afford. So I understand the kind of need to make it fit the budget.
Oh yeah, 100%. Especially when probably a little bit like Millennium Machines, the YouTube channel is not self-sustaining at the moment. There's more expenditures than money coming in. So
yeah,
it is what it is.
Yeah.
All right. So
I feel that more than you know.
Fair enough. So tell us a little bit about yourself then, because you did mention that this was a university project, but that wasn't really what your degree was about. So like, did you pick up any formal engineering learning, or is it just all learn on the job type stuff with the Milo? With the Milo,
no,
sorry.
So I am the only one on the team who is not a classically trained engineer in some way or another. We've got network engineers and people who write code all day, and people who actually work on proper industrial machines. Like Dave the company that he works for builds robot arms, and then Ed also works for a CNC company where they build machines and proper structural engineering parts. So I'm the only one who doesn't have that. So I'll tell the story. I've told it a few times, but I'll tell it from the start. So I went to university for outdoor leadership. right? Because I was a big outdoor nerd. I loved climbing. I loved kayaking. I loved all that kind of stuff, and that's what I saw myself doing when I got older. So between my first and second year of uni, during that summer break, I went to go work at a scout camp type thing, and the scout camp was in the middle of the sticks. It was middle of nowhere. There were a few houses nearby, but it was an hour and a half walk into town, and we weren't allowed our cars on site. I don't remember the reason why, but yeah, we weren't allowed cars or motorbikes or anything like that. So we would get fed throughout the week by the company, but on weekends we were told we had to get our own food. We had to fend for ourselves. So we would walk into town, buy all our food, come back, and then every single time, without fail, we would forget to buy like knives, forks, plates, things like that, like disposable version of those. So a couple of my mates and I came up with the dumb idea because we saw on Facebook Marketplace someone was selling a CR10, a really old 3D printer. We would all pitch in to buy this printer, and then we would print our own knives and forks and things like that. Now, at the time, we didn't know that PLA was so bad, it was so sensitive to heat that it would just melt into our food, and we ended up just not doing it anymore. But I got to keep the printer after that. I didn't know how to design anything, and I went back to university. And I was looking, I started getting into kind of the YouTube side of it. It was the Thomas Sun Ladderers, the CNC kitchen type stuff. Started to learn off of that, and I realized that all I was doing was just taking things from the Thingiverse at the time, and just printing them for fun, just the little knickknacks and things like that. And I was getting a bit bored of that, so I decided I wanted to teach myself how to do some CAD work and to do some stuff like that. So I decided I'll design myself a PC case, and the PC case came out absolutely horrible. It was awful, and that's when I came across Angus from Maker's Muse, and Angus from Maker's Muse taught me a whole lot from his videos. And Thomas Sanladerer was starting on his MPCNC build, and I thought, wow, there's a whole world of subtractive manufacturing now that I can learn about too. So I decided I was going to build myself an MPCNC. The MPCNC at the time was a great machine for what you could have before we had rails that were readily available, linear rails. I am not a fan of the machine now because when I built it, it never functioned very well, right? And it got canned, and I never used it. It laid in a corner in my dorm room for a very long time. So I started doing a little bit of research into CNC machines and how they worked and all the properties that they needed to have. And I came across a YouTube channel of someone who modified an open builds mini mill. And I looked at it and went, okay, that seemed pretty easy. Those are really simple modifications. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take those modifications, I'm going to make them a little bit better, and then I'm just going to do that as a practice for CAD. I don't want anything more. It's just going to be a practice. And one day I started to mess around with the render space that's in Fusion 360. I rendered out a photo and I put it on a local 3D printing Facebook group. And that Facebook group came back going, oh, we get the files for this? This looks really cool. And that was at the time what I would call Milo V1.-1. Like it was prior to ever actually wanting to do anything with the project. And then I kept getting messages about it. I put it on Reddit. I put things like that saying, "Oh, can we get the files for this? Can we get this? This is really cool." And at the time, it was an awful machine, but I didn't know that until later on. So I started improving on it, and then that's when we got V1.1, V1.2, V1.3, and V1.3 got to a point where I was actually kind of thinking, okay, this is actually making sense, but I was still yet to make a machine. So I thought, okay, the next version, I'm going to start buying the parts. And like I said earlier, this was when I was at uni. I was still broke as all hell, so I would buy one piece every month for about a year, or a set of pieces. And then I finally, in my last week of university, managed to get a working version of V1.4. So I released V1.4, took it back home because I spent 3 months in Kenya where my parents live, and took it back there, had some fun with it, realized what the downfalls of it were, what the little pitfalls were, started to develop V1.5, and V1.5 was a very minor difference between V1.4 and V1.5. And then that all halted for a little bit because I was homeless for a while, obviously, when I was living with my girlfriend, and all that kind of stuff happened. So I had to put that on halt. I came back and people were still interested in the project, so I still kept on learning, and I still kept on going. V1.5 released, and then yeah, we got to a point where we are now. So that's my engineering story, starting from a guy who likes ropes and climbing stuff to someone who now nerds out with 3D printers all day.
Well, that's really inspiring. At what point did you get a team? Because like it sounded like all the way up to 1.4, it was kind of just you, or did I misinterpret that?
It was pretty much me up to 1.4, even up to 1.5. The original release for 1.5 was me. Dave came on really early on into the lifespan of V1.5, and I didn't have the space to run my Milo, so I sent it to him, and he ragged it to hell and back. He came back with a bunch of stuff. He was the first one to ever create any kind of proper YouTube video for it. If you want to watch the original videos, 3DP and Me is the channel. And you can see how different that Milo is to what we see as 1.5 now. But he started doing some videos. He got people excited for what the actual thing could do. And then later on, Ed came on and Xscale came on. And 9 Mile is actually a fairly recent addition to the team. So up until about a year and a half ago, it was pretty much just me.
That's incredible. Is that original 1.5 the one with the Vivor spindle that bolts on instead of the cylindrical one?
No, so that's just a mod that you can do. So the cylindrical ones are they're easier to make a standard part for because they either come in a 65mm version or an 80mm version. The square spindles, the plates that you have to make for them are all individual because there is no standard bolt pattern.
Oh, I get you.
Yeah, if you can get a square spindle to work, they are better. They're a little bit better than the cylindrical spindles with an HOI, Hearts of Iron mod, but they are slightly better. Yeah.
Interesting stuff. Cool. I do ask a question though of all of my guests. Do you mind if I throw it to you now?
Yeah, go ahead.
So just imagine you get a grant. So just think unlimited money to start the business of your dreams. It doesn't have to be profitable because you get money, but it does have to provide a product or a service. And let's say, for the sake of argument, it's not dumping it into Millennium Machines. What kind of business would you start?
A restaurant.
A restaurant?
Yeah. My mum's a restaurant. Well, was a restaurateur for a good portion of a life. I grew up in restaurants. I am a pretty decent cook. It's what I do when Milo or my job or things like that gets a bit too much. So that's kind of what chills me out. So either a restaurant or a dog kennel or something like that.
What style of food for the restaurant?
Just something hearty. I don't have a tolerance for fancy food. I love food that is prepared well and with love, but I despise food that is presentation only.
I mean, fair enough. Can you give us one example dish of something you would like to cook and serve to people?
Duck confit, because duck confit is one of those things that should be a simple dish that people have messed around with too much, right? It should be very simple and very hearty, and very delicious.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but confit means poached in fat, correct?
Yeah, cooked in its own fat.
There we go. Okay, yes, we're on the same page.
Yeah.
That sounds absolutely delicious. It sounds like the type of thing that I would never get, because probably here in Canada it'd be like $50 a serving.
Yeah, probably. It's really easy to make though. Like if you can get hold of a duck or some duck legs, it's really easy to make.
Might have to look into that. I'm more. I call myself trailer trash when it comes to my food preferences. I just like whatever is cheap and big and tasty. So I typically go for very much how should I say this, non-Americanized ethnic food. So
Okay.
here in the States and in Canada, it's very common that, like, let's say Chinese food is very much adapted for the local palate. But I prefer going to places that are like made by people cooking like back home.
Yeah.
So when I find a good Chinese food place, Indian food I wasn't such a fan of, but Japanese food, really good. Mexican food, very hard to find in Canada. Good Mexican food, by the way. So those kinds of things is what I go for. Usually you get a good portion, lots of spices, and inexpensive. That's what I go. That's what I go for.
Yeah, I can get that. I can get that. I love lots of spicy food for me as well, because I grew up in East Africa. Swahili food is like just the love of my life. I love it so much.
I could spend the next hour essentially just prodding you about the next release of the Milo. That's what interests me the most.
Yep.
But since it's pretty clear that you can't share many details, is there anything you'd like to tell the audience? Maybe you want to tell them to go check out a certain YouTube video, maybe your development GitHub, maybe to support the project. What would you like to tell them?
I'm going to offer up a few creators that you can watch. So a few live streamers who have done some builds, if you want to look at them, are Modbot and MandicReally are currently completing builds. People who have completed builds are Steve Builds and Nero3D. They're some good spaces to watch. The Millennium Machines official YouTube channel is always a good thing to subscribe to if you can. If I stream personally on for the company that I'm also part of on Desktop Machine Shop. So you can watch me do some builds there. We don't just do Milo builds though, so we do like Vorons and stuff as well. If you want to have a look at the project, go to Millennium Machine Works, the Millennium Machine Works website. The best place to get most of your knowledge is Discord. There's a huge community there, and people love talking about the machine there. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
If I can just add, a friend of the show, Sion, Unexpected Maker, has finished his Milo build as well, and he does a couple live streams messing with it, and I think there's going to be more upcoming, so you guys can check that out. All the links that were just talked about will be in the show notes or in the description below. Well,
Sion, I've just seen his build as well. I just thought he was a random person, and then I looked at the videos he put out, and he's got a whole shop, like a professional shop.
Oh yeah,
It's great.
He develops his own ESP32 microcontrollers, basically.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
Yeah, he does everything from the design to the pick and place to the reflow soldering to the packaging to the shipping. He's I don't know if he has helpers, but for the most part, he's a one-man operation too.
Okay, cool. That's really cool.
So I want to thank you very much for taking your time and coming onto the podcast and chatting with us today. If any of you, especially companies, because this is an expensive machine, but if any of you really want the 1.6 to come out as soon as possible, just send me a 1.5. And then usually that's when the next version comes out, is when I finally get my hands on the current version.
December this year, we're going to try and get something out for you guys.
Oh, there we go. So, yeah, if the 1.5 meets your needs, go grab one. Right now, the LDO kits are getting fairly well reviewed if you can get your hands on them. But yeah, thank you very much for stopping by and chatting with us, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening.
No worries. Thanks for having me.